Number one, one of my patients had a severe case of depression. I'm a therapist, by the way. Sometimes my patients request to record audio of what they say happened to them so they won't have to be questioned about it over and over again. I work in a small city in Canada. I've seen many horrid cases of assault and trauma, but this one really stuck to me. Miss Kylie Smith, age 27, unmarried, suffers from high levels of depression and schizophrenia. Unmarried, under the guardianship of her father. Another thing to note is she had her mouth cut ear to ear, forming a scar and difficulty doing basic tasks. Thankfully, she has been recovering well physically. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said about her mental status. Here, I asked her what happened to her that gave her the scar, and how the monsters that follow her are connected to it. The following are her exact words written from the recordings. My sister Maria and I went on a hiking trip a few months ago. Beautiful place, lovely service, and wonderful people. However, our country is a bit poor, so in some areas like the high mountains, there isn't much development other than small towns and cities. Even those, it's hard to keep security up, not to mention how eerie and unsettling it is on the roads at night with no streetlights and the only light being the moon, stars, and passing by cars, and if you're lucky, a flashlight or a phone. Plus, you have to watch your step or you'll fall into a river or a lake. It's not pitch black, but dark enough to need a flashlight. Walk slowly and watch your step if you don't have one. I don't know what's with my sister and I, risking our lives just to see some cool sights. Maybe it's the thrill of adventure, or the urge to promote tourism and economy in our developing home. Or maybe it's just what kids do when they're bored. Also, just saying, my sister was a beautiful person. Silky, short, strawberry hair, tan skin, and a curvy yet slim figure. Beautiful emerald eyes and healthy pink lips. Me, on the other hand. Anyways, me and her got to our hotel room around 10 p.m. The town was pretty populated, but our hotel was around a mile or two away from the marketplace. Again, eerie dark roads, no street lights at all, just the distant marketplace. The two of us had our phones with us. It was a miracle we hadn't dropped them yet, and that they weren't even scratched. I left mine in the room though. The area was known to be relatively crime free, so it was pretty safe to walk around alone. God damn it, I should have went with my phone addiction and took it anyways. Maria, though, took hers. I mean, we needed some sort of light to help us walk. What are we, bats? We need to see so we don't get mugged too easily or fall into some fast flowing river. She decided to walk behind me with the light facing forward, one in front to lead, one in the back to light. Seems fair. I guess so. We walked a few minutes, chatting as we do, joking about how scary the road is, and that if we drop something, especially as valuable as her phone, it'd be gone for good. I heard something fall and Maria go, "Damn it!" I looked at her. I noticed a light on the rock off the road. Of course, her phone fell down near the river. Thank God the way down wasn't steep, nor long, just a few feet. She said, "You go on ahead, watch your step. I'll go grab my phone." I nodded and replied, and carefully kept walking to the market. I walked a minute or two, or maybe longer, maybe less. It felt boring without someone to keep me company, even if it was just a few minutes. Time slowed down, but I didn't. Then I stopped and turned around to look and see if Maria was there. No sign of her. I got worried and heard a splash in the river. That's where it started. Thousands of horrid thoughts filled my mind. Sister's instinct kicked in. I sprinted, ran, damn it, I flew to where she stopped, swearing and holding back tears as I did. I immediately looked down, calling her name in my weak, little shaky voice, trying to keep myself together. Then I saw it, the light of her phone. I sighed in relief as she signaled me to keep going, the light only illuminating her lower half, her denim pants, a bit of her black hoodie, a bit of her almost completely covered arms. It was cold, what can I say? We kept walking, and I asked, "You good?" She gave me the thumbs up in reply. "'Kay," I said as much and kept walking. The splash must have given her a scare, whatever it was. She wasn't talking much. No, not at all. Just showing signs with her hands. I couldn't really see her face or upper half in general. I turned around to ask her why she wasn't talking, and then I saw it. Her hand, which she was covering up by trying to keep it in her pocket, her beautiful tanned skin was now white, pale, and her gorgeous hand, like that of a model, now scrawny and skinny. I froze and gulped, but the instinct kicked in as I shook in fear. We're almost at the market as my heart started to race. Only two thoughts came into my head. This isn't Maria, and run. And I did just that. I ran, in tears, into the crowded market. An elderly local man saw me in distress and walked over to me. "Hello, is something wrong? You seem upset." I stuttered to talk. Nothing came out but whimpers as I pointed at the road. The man's eyes went to look at her. He yelled something in their native language which I couldn't understand. For some reason, he still had a smile on his face. At that moment, I didn't even care, as I looked up to see the light of the market shine on my sister as she walked towards me. Her face, no, its face, that fucking face, cliche monster, and the same one that follows me. A grin ear to ear, with white eyes, dripping blood, a hairline so in the back you'd think it was bald, and greasy short hair, a hairstyle like my sister's, but nothing like her shiny and silky one. I heard gunshots and screeches. I couldn't tell if it was shot or not. Its voice haunts me, and it forever will. That damn scream of hell sounded like the devil himself got scared and screeched in fear or pain. That damn thing's grin. I didn't even realize I had started hyperventilating as I felt as if I was going to faint. The locals grabbed me and pulled me into a little house of theirs. They tried calming me down. They themselves seemed oddly calm, as if this was perfectly normal thing or maybe even a good thing, but they were just trying to distract me, right? I kept losing my shit, sobbing and yelling in fear and sadness, anger and disgust. So many emotions I just couldn't manage and I blacked out. I woke up to the sound of them speaking in what sounded like a chanting. I felt a pain in my mouth. I opened my eyes to see more of those monsters and those locals feasting on the corpse of my sister as they carved into the sides of my mouth. It was looking at me through the window right now, tapping on the glass. You hear it, don't you? The last line gives me the chills to this day. I remember the distinct light tapping on the window right before she said it. Sometimes I wonder if my patients are really mentally ill, or if it's just something we can't see. Number 2. My husband had an affair. I found out because he brought her home when he didn't realize I was there. They burst through the door, lips locked, making out in our breezeway. When he finally saw me, after he had peeled her off of him, his mouth dropped open. She was one of his oldest friends, and I had met her many times. We had even gone to her house to have dinner on several occasions with her husband. She wasn't an innocent stranger that didn't realize she was involved with a married man. His mouth opened to explain, and I shushed him. "I made your lunch. Come eat," I said. They stood there, not knowing what to do. "Just come sit down. There's enough for the both of you." And they sat down. "Baby, I don't know what to say," he began. It just kinda happened." I nodded, handing them their plates and sitting myself. They both acted like they had never seen spaghetti before. I had made it just the way he liked it. He stared at me, searching for more words. She sat silent, staring at her plate, frozen. "How long have you been together?" I asked. "Baby, I think we should," he began. I said, "How long have you been together?" I nearly shouted. I didn't want to shout, and she yelped like I had hit her. "3 months. We've only had sex once. We've just been taking," he said. "Please don't tell my husband," she cried. I started laughing. It was just so damn funny. The mistress, the adulterer, worried about what this would do to her marriage. My husband attempted to cut in, but I was nearly hysterical. There were tears streaming down my face, and I could barely take in a breath. "Look, I'm not doing this," my husband finally said, standing up, turning, and leaving. He took her arm. "Let's go." "Where do you think you're going?" I asked. "Leaving," he responded. "I'll take her home and be back later to talk to you." "You don't just get to walk out." Not after. I waved my hand at her in a gesture of confusion. "This? I fucked up. I know I did. His tone softened a little and he took a step towards me. She means nothing to me. I love you. You're my everything. I don't know, made a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. You didn't make a mistake. You purposely carried on an affair with a married woman, I said. Well, maybe you should have listened and talked to him more, she said. He's not the only one to blame here, honey. Don't ever talk about my husband like you know him. You know nothing, I said through bared teeth. Well, I obviously know something about him, like how to turn him on, she hissed. Come on, he said, jerking her arm. I'm taking you home. I jumped in front of them, blocking their way. No, you will sit now, I commanded. They sat back at the table, and while I would like to let you continue believing it was just my commanding presence, it was probably more the giant knife I had used to chop the vegetables that I was now wielding in my hand. Eat, I said. They just stared at me. Eat, I yelled, brandishing the knife. And then they ate. We finally talked after dinner. She was a puddle of tears. He was ridiculous. I never wanted to hurt you. I don't want to lose you. I love you. He was nearly begging. You aren't losing me, and I'm not going anywhere, I said, kissing his cheek. She stayed all day and we talked. I made them drinks and later in the day dinner. After dinner, we all went to bed. It's been like that ever since. Every night, he sleeps between us in our now shared king size bed. I don't have to worry about him cheating anymore because his mistress is well within my reach. He'd become sullen and withdrawn after a while. I don't know why. After all, he got everything he wanted. He wanted me, he wanted her, he wanted to stay in the house, in our bed. I let him have all those things. Still, some days I'd see him crying. I'll admit, I did take his phone away, avoiding temptation, and he had to start working from home while we rebuilt trust. I don't understand what's so upsetting about that. Last night I heard him talking to her. He kept saying he was sorry. When I walked into the room, oh, by the way, they're not allowed to talk without me present, he begged for me to take her away. He couldn't keep looking at her. He was finally as disgusted as I was at the idea of him sleeping with her. I agreed and took her home to her husband. He broke down in tears when he saw her. I didn't stay for the reunion. I'd been watching through the trees. I was careful and had parked my car down the street in the woods. I was confident she wouldn't tell him where she'd been all these weeks. She was so worried he would find out about the affair after all. When I got home, my husband wasn't in much better spirits, but he was better. I'm sure we'll work it out. I'm afraid we'll have to get a new bed, though. Rotting corpses leave such nasty stains. Number 3. I feel I need to elaborate on specific events of a particularly heinous event of my life. It happened 10 years ago yesterday, and I suppose that's what brought it all back. I never visit my mother's grave, but this time I felt compelled to. I don't know why. I guess some memories never really fade. They just slumber in the back of your mind, waiting for the right moment to reappear like some harrowing specter. And as my current state of mind can best be described as morose and melancholic, I believe that to be the main reason why I've now decided to share my experiences at my parents' house that fateful day. I was returning home for the weekend after my first week in college. I decided it was best I'd attend school close to my since I didn't want to leave my little sister Lucy alone with them for too long. They were horrible people. I can't really put it any other way. Abusive alcoholics and through just terrible parents. And while the thought of leaving Lucy behind tore me apart, I knew I had to graduate with a degree to even stand a chance of getting her away from them. I was scared to return home, not because my parents, I had no other feelings than red glowing hate for them, but because of Lucy and her reaction. We didn't part on the best terms, and I don't think she really understood why I had to go. Granted, it had only been a few weeks since I'd last seen her, but I hadn't stopped thinking about her for a second. The tears running down her face as I drove off, her sad, disappointed expression when I told her I had to leave, all of it tore my heart into pieces. It was roughly a 2 hour drive up to Clear Lake from college campus, more than enough time to second guess everything I had done, more than enough time to imagine all the awful things that could have happened in a week. But I could never, in my most hellish nightmares, have imagined what faced me when I entered that cursed place. I turned off the interstate and followed the bumpy forest road leading up to the house around noon. It would usually take about 10 to 15 minutes, but it was raining heavily and I had some trouble seeing the road ahead. I guess it took me closer to a half an hour, which would put my arrival at around 12:30. The first thing I noticed as I pulled up was that my father's shitty old van was gone. I sighed with relief, one less unstable alcoholic to deal with. I deliberately parked in a spot, grabbed my bag, and trekked the remaining couple minutes up the near vertical climb to the house. The horrid silhouette of that damn place was barely visible ahead in the pouring rain, and I felt my spirit wasting away with each heavy step. What should I say? How should I act? Was she happy to see me, or did she hate me even more now? I approached the front door hesitantly, and I just stood there in the rain, by now completely soaked, staring into the weather-beaten wood. Should I knock? Should I just walk in like nothing changed? Well, I ended up deciding to knock. There was no answer. I kept knocking for about 5 minutes, but to no avail. I figured they were busy. Mother busy drinking, Lucy busy avoiding my mother. Eventually, I pushed the door open and crossed the threshold with careful steps. The place was dark and dead silent. I closed the door with an audible bang, but there was no response anywhere. I just listened intently for several minutes, but there didn't appear to be anyone home. I finally just decided to take a look around. Maybe they were sleeping or something. The first floor was completely vacant. If I hadn't known better, I would have thought that no one had been there for at least a couple days. Dirty dishes were piling up by the sink, and there were several half empty beer cans standing in the living room table. There was something uncanny and eerie about it all. Like I had walked into something I really shouldn't have. But I couldn't stop here. I had to find Lucy. I ascended the stairs, and I started becoming aware of the smell. Faintly at first, like a half familiar scent of something disagreeable, but steadily increasing in potency as I came closer to the second floor. When I found myself outside of Lucy's room, the stench was so unbearable that I had to cover my nose. I dreaded opening the door. My mind was already then starting to come up with several explanations for the smell, none of which were particularly pleasant in nature. I pushed the door open carefully and called out a faint, "Lucy, I'm home." No answer. I swallowed deeply and stepped silently into the room. One of the scenarios I'd simulated in my mind involved finding Lucy dead, but even that dreadful imagery paled in comparison to what I found in that ghastly room. Upon Lucy's beautiful pink bed, I found the source of the godforsaken stench, the decaying, rotting, decomposing corpse of my mother. I had no strong feelings for her. This remains true to this day. But finding your mother dead would still instill some amount of shock into anyone. Of that I'm sure. But that wasn't all. She was maimed and broken, her body bent in impossible angles, bones protruding from her neck and waist, her face frozen in a gruesome, tormented expression of utter fear and loathing. I stumbled back, moments away from regurgitating all the contents of my stomach, and then I saw it. I saw her, Lucy. She was curled up between the broken remains of my mother's arms, her small, delicate hands caressing the few remaining strands of hair on my mother's head, her eyes fixed upon her tortured face, mouth wide in a joyous smile. I couldn't move, yet alone from coherent thoughts. But I knew then what had to happen, and I knew we had to hurry. "Lucy," I yelled, "get away from her." She turned her gaze to me, eyes now widening, maybe in fear, or hate, or recognition, I couldn't tell which. She sat up in her bed, her feet playfully dangling on the side of it. Her smile quickly vanished, and she jumped down rather unwillingly. "I just want to be held," she sulked. "She can't do that no more." I know," I said reassuringly, "but we have to get out of here before Dad comes home." She nodded hesitantly and just stood there, her pretty white dress soaked in our dead mother's blood, drenched with unwashable stench of decay and rot. "How the hell did you get her up here?" I asked, annoyed. "And where did you find her?" "She was late," she replied coldly. "I dragged her from the garage in Father's bag, only she couldn't fit right. I had to help her get in properly." What would he do when he came back, I wondered. Kill us too? That was definitely a possibility if we didn't return Mother to her temporary resting place. Could we just run? Drive off like nothing happened? I doubt it. He knew where I lived and he could find us. Police then? 911? It was too risky. They were all buddies around here, and they all knew my father. I was left with only one option. Drag her back down to the garage, clean up the mess as best as I could. "Where's the bag?" I asked. "We need to get her back down." Lucy pointed to the corner of her room. A large duffel bag stained with blood was placed by the window. I grabbed it quickly and started calculating how the hell I could get her to fit in it. I examined the body as carefully as I could under the circumstances. It was really messed up. Like, truly fucked. How did you get her in it? I asked nervously. Was she like this when you found her? She looked at me innocently. I had to bend her, she mumbled. She wouldn't fit otherwise. I had to steady myself against a wall. This was a whole new level of horrifying. Not only did she witness the death of her mother, but she also found it in her to break her dead body like a twig to fit in a duffel bag, then drag her up the stairs into her bedroom, and somehow unwrap the mangled broken corpse, finally propping her up in her bed like some sickening perverted doll. I didn't know what to think. I only knew that I had to act quickly. I grabbed the body by the feet and dragged it off the bed. It wasn't as light as Lucy had let on, and it hit the floor with a loud thump. And I grabbed her hands and folded her shattered torso over, her head now facing her feet. Somehow I managed to roll the dead lump of flesh and bones into the waiting bag, but there was no way I was able to close it. It just had to do. I couldn't think of any other way to do it. Come on, I yelled to Lucy. Help me get her down. Lucy seemed to be in some kind of shock. She just stared blankly at me, her blue eyes distant and cold. She slowly started following me as I dragged the bag out of the room and down the hallway. When I came to the stairs, I stopped, desperately trying to find a suitable tactic for the descent. It was then I heard the car pull into the driveway. Shit, I yelled. Lucy, wait here. I'll try to divert him. I had no idea what my plan was, but I bolted down the stairs and out into the pouring rain. I had to come up with some excuse to lead him the hell away from the second floor, as well as a garage. But what? How? My mind was racing as I ran as fast as my legs could bear me down the driveway. To my great surprise, it wasn't my father's van pulling up next to my car. It was a police cruiser. I honestly didn't know if I was relieved or terrified. Probably a hybrid emotion of both. I slowed down and started walking down the steep path. I had to come up with a new plan, a new excuse, but first I had to figure out what I was dealing with. Harlan? A familiar voice called. Is that you? It was Ren, one of the worst fucking police officers to ever wear a badge. You could bribe him with a promise, and he'd look the other way for anything his buddies did. And my father was a buddy, no doubt about it. Yeah, I called back. That you, Ren? Sure is, he said. Say, you haven't seen your dad around. I shook my head and walked closer with steady steps. I suddenly became painfully aware of the fact that I had just recently carried a corpse around, that my clothes were probably drenched in an unnameable odor. So I just stopped dead in my tracks. I haven't, I said, but I just got here. Figured he'd be out at the bar or something. That's the strangest thing, he said, scratching the back of his head. His car is parked down by the interstate, but no one seems to know where he might be. I shrugged and crossed my arms, trying to cover as much of my clothes as I possibly could. Can't help you then, I said. Like I said, I only just arrived. Mom and Lucy said he was out. He stared at me silently for a while, like there was something in his mind, like there was something about my story that didn't add up. Alright then, he smiled. He'll probably show up. He always does, am I right? Sure sounds like him, I laughed. You have a good one now. You too, Harlan, he tipped his hat. Say hi to your mom and little Lucy, you hear? Will do, Ren, I said. See you around. See ya, he said, and climbed back into his cruiser. I stood and watched as he backed out of the driveway and disappeared into the woods. I let out a sigh of relief. My father wasn't out on one of his benders. It could be days before he showed up again. It would give me plenty of time to clean up his mess and maybe even get Lucy somewhere safe. Permanently safe. I jogged back up to the house. I could allow myself to breathe again and to get my head on straight. I had this. I could do this now. As I walked into the front door, I immediately noticed something sinister and unexplainable. A trail of blood leading from the bottom of the stairs into the kitchen. I called out Lucy's name repeatedly, but got no response. I had no choice but to follow the trail. It led me from the kitchen out the back door, and from the back door into the garage. It had to be Lucy. She had dragged the duffel bag all the way by herself. I shuddered at the thought of it. What horrors had she experienced in the week I was gone, I wondered. I carefully walked up to the garage door, peeking through the window. I couldn't see much, but I saw Lucy's blonde hair clear as day. I opened the door nervously. Lucy? I called softly. Are you in here? She didn't answer, but I heard something breathing in the dark, and a strange, almost inaudible sound, like a low-pitched rustling. There's also a steady echo of dripping water, probably a leak somewhere in the ramshackle roof. My hands fumbled on the wall to find the light switch, my eyes fixed on her blonde hair somewhere deep in the darkness. When I finally found it and the light flickered eerily into full illumination, I was struck with mind-numbing fear at the sight unfolding before me, and I staggered back weakly, my motor system more or less shutting down as a reaction to the nauseating and repulsive nature of it. Lucy was standing at the far end of the garage, facing the wall, my mother's tormented head sticking up from the duffel bag beside her like some nightmarish jack-in-the-box. On the wall facing Lucy, hanging from heavy metal chains, was my half-naked father, his eyes wide open in fear and pain, tears streaming down his bloody face. His mouth was duct taped shut, and I could spot the thousands of tiny cuts upon his flayed skin. It was then I saw the wallpaper knife in Lucy's right hand. It was dripping with blood. Drip, 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 in a steady, echoing interval. "It's called Ling Chi," Lucy said darkly. "Death by a thousand cuts." She turned to face me, and I realized this wasn't my Lucy anymore. I couldn't tell you what it was, but it wasn't her. The smile on her perfect lips were eerie and cold, and the look in her pretty eyes was full of hate and detestment. "You can keep 'em alive for days if you're skilled," she continued, "and they'll feel every cut, every slice, every little kiss of the blade." I just stared at her in horror. I didn't know what to do. There was something so sinister and unearthly about her appearance, like she had changed completely, yet remained the same perfect little angel girl I adored. Her blood-drenched white dress and flowing blonde hair stood out as a striking contrast to the perverted ritual being performed in that garage, yet I could feel pity for him. He truly deserved it, probably deserved more. "Leave now," she said, pointing the knife in my direction. "I must finish this." I edged towards the door, as much as I wanted to stop her, which wasn't that much. I knew deep down I couldn't even if I wanted to. I backed out of the garage slowly, never taking my eyes off of her. I didn't know who or what she was, but I knew she was being serious. There was no way I was getting caught between her and her prey. I closed the door quickly as I exited, stumbling back as I did. I fell flat on the ground on my back. The screams I heard next, I can't even attempt to depict in writing, nor the noises of a body being ripped to shreds. I never opened the door, never looked in that garage, never came back to that place ever again. I only learned from Ren what they found there the next day. My father was unrecognizable, he said, torn into tiny pieces, splattered all over the walls, roof, and floor. They could never figure out what happened. Everything was swept under the rug. They couldn't stomach the potential shame, but most importantly, they could never find her, never find Lucy. I always wondered what happened to her, but I never tried to find her. We didn't have many relatives. We had an aunt far out in the wilderness, so I figured she might have gone there, but I never had it in me to check in with her. My Lucy was gone, I was sure of that. Whatever she was now, I wanted to stay as far away as possible. She's out there somewhere and I can never be safe. Lucy, if you read this, I'm sorry, and I should never have left you alone.